Right, Ms. Aldridge.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Smith.
Hi.
What do you do for work, sir? Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes, currently I am a paramedic with Hennepin EMS.
And how long have you worked with Hennepin EMS?
Going on 4 years this summer.
And have you worked as a paramedic or in the capacity as a paramedic before that?
I worked for Gwinnett County down in Georgia for approximately a year as a trainee, pretty much paramedic school for fire and EMS. I also worked BLS as a paid-on-call firefighter for the city of Andover.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. Did you say VLS?
BLS, basic life support, just first responder stuff.
Okay, so maybe could you describe a little bit what basic life support training you got?
EMT stuff, equivalent to the Minneapolis Fire Department.
So before going through your paramedic training, had you initially received some EMT or basic type of life support type training? Excuse me.
Correct.
All right, so in terms of your job as a paramedic with Hennepin EMS, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
We respond to various calls for emergency medical services in various environments.
And are those wide-ranging? And could you give some examples of the types of calls that you respond to?
Examples of calls I respond to, car accidents, intoxicated people, overdoses, seizures, heart attacks, stub toes.
So it can be a variety of things, is that right?
Correct.
And does that include cardiac arrests?
Yes.
Okay. And when you respond to a cardiac arrest, what does that mean?
A cardiac arrest, when I respond to that?
What's a cardiac arrest?
A cardiac arrest is an individual that is, in lay's terms, dead, not producing a pulse, they're not breathing.
So when you as a paramedic use terms like cardiac arrest or full arrest, is that what you mean?
They're, in lay terms, dead, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to direct your attention to May 25th of last year.
Okay.
Were you on duty as a paramedic with Hennepin EMS that date?
Yes, miss.
And did you respond to a call that evening?
Yes, miss.
Just a little bit back, that way, not quite, a little bit, there you go.
Sorry, sir.
Not a problem, we have to adjust for everybody, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if you can't hear me, please let me know. And if I can't hear you, I'll let you know.
Thank you, miss.
So getting back to May 25th, what was the initial code or the initial type of call that you understood you were responding to?
We were called Code 2, which means non-emergent, to a mouth injury.
And then at some point en route to that scene, was that call upgraded?
Yes.
And what was the information you had at that time in terms of the upgrade?
At that time, it was Code 3.
And what is Code 3?
Lights and sirens, get there with due regard and as quickly as possible.
And at that point in time, was that all the information you had in terms of first being Code 2 and then Code 3? Not any, did you have any additional information about why it was elevated to a Code 3?
At that time, I had no additional information other than Code 3.
So where did you ultimately respond to that Code 3 call? Was that in the area of 38th in Chicago?
That's correct.
And what did you observe? What did you see when you arrived on scene?
What did I observe when I arrived on scene? There was a police squad, an individual laying down, 3 officers on the individual. There was multiple people. There was multiple cell phones out. There was elevated tones used. It didn't feel like a welcoming environment.
So when you arrived, and you said that you saw 3 officers on top of an individual, that individual that they were on top of, was he later identified?
Yes.
And was that individual identified to be George Floyd?
Yes.
So when you come up and you see the scene, 3 officers on top of George Floyd, and you said other individuals with cell phones out, what did you do when you arrived?
What did I do when I arrived on scene? Assessed all corners around us, just kind of just gauge what was going on. I walked up to the individual, noticed he wasn't moving. I didn't see any chest rise or fall on this individual. He was in handcuffs at the time. I went up and, sorry.
And when you approached, you said he was in handcuffs. As you approached him to inspect further, were the officers still on top of him?
The officers were still on him when I approached.
And what did you do when you approached?
I was assessing the scene and running through what care may be needed.
And did you take some initial steps, like checking for a pulse?
I checked for a pulse.
And did you also check the individual, Mr. Floyd's, pupils?
I did.
And what did you determine at that point?
They were large, dilated.
So you determined that his pupils were large and dilated. What about a pulse?
I did not palpate a pulse.
And when you say palpate, is that you didn't feel or detect a
I
pulse?
did not detect a pulse.
And what did his condition appear to be to you overall?
In lay terms, I thought he was dead.
So what did you do next?
I kind of looked for my partner and told him I think he's dead and I want to move this out of here.
Okay.
And I will begin care in the back
Did you say you would begin care in the back?
of my rig.
And is the rig where your equipment is to deal with something like a cardiac arrest?
Yes, miss.
I'm going to show you something that has not been admitted but has been marked as Exhibit 56, so we'll just show it on your screen at the moment. Do you see that on your screen?
Kind of a glare, but yeah.
Can you see it now if you reposition a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we here, Judge? This? Yeah. I get the gist of it, yeah. That's me touching this carotid artery. There's no pulse.
All right. So you recognize this image is yourself checking for Mr. Floyd's pulse. Is that a fair and accurate picture of that?
Yes, miss.
Your Honor, I would offer Exhibit 56,
Any objection? 56 is received.
and I'd ask to publish it. All right. And I think you just described this as you checking for a carotid pulse. Is that right?
That's correct.
What's a carotid pulse? What does that mean?
The artery in the neck. It's one we check for that. It's closest to the heart. There should be one there if you're up and breathing.
Okay. And at the time you're checking
Or
for this,
alive. Pardon me?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Or I meant alive. I said breathing. Anyways, go ahead.
So why don't I just circle back to that?
Okay.
You're checking for a carotid pulse. What was your response to that? It would be one that you would find if you were, please finish your thought.
Repeat that, please.
I apologize.
No, it's on me.
Why do you check the carotid pulse, and what would you expect?
In a living person, there should be a pulse there. I did not feel one. I suspected this patient to be dead,
Okay.
in lay terms.
And at the moment that you're checking for this carotid pulse, are the officers still positioned on top of Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to take down Exhibit 56, and I'm going to put on the screen an exhibit that has already been admitted as Exhibit 248. If we could put that up, please. And then, does this show a different angle of your initial, well, what does this show here? Do you see yourself in this picture?
Yes.
Okay, and what are you doing?
I am at the top of the screen there in that brown uniform.
And you can use the stylus, should be a little stylus or
Am I
your
supposed to
finger
touch?
to, it's a touch screen, so you can just
So
point out where you were.
That's me.
Okay. And what are you doing in this picture?
I think I'm grabbing my flashlight and I'm assessing what's going on here.
Okay. And then in terms of using your flashlight, is that something you use to assist with checking pupils?
Yes, miss.
Okay. So while you were at the head of Mr. Floyd, did you check both his pulse and his pupils?
Yes, miss.
All right. And we can take that down. So at that point, what happened next after you did those things?
After I checked pulse and pupils,
Yes.
I looked for my partner and provided him that I believed the individual to be deceased. I wanted to get off scene, and I would start care in the back.
And did you take steps to make that happen?
Yeah, we grabbed our stretcher, our poles and canvas, and we were starting to prep to move the patient.
And did you have any interaction with the officers in terms of moving the patient?
Once we got the poles and canvas on the ground, the officers were very helpful in moving the patient onto the canvas.
So did the officers assist you in moving
Yes.
the patient? Did you have to provide some direction to them in terms of moving the patient?
Yes, at one point I had to tell one of them to get out of the way. They're in my way.
Okay. And then why was that? What were you trying to accomplish?
I wanted to get my patient to my rig as quickly as possible so I could begin my resuscitation efforts. He was standing in between the stretcher and where I needed to be. He needed to be eliminated from the situation.
Were you trying, you said as quickly as possible. Why were you trying to get things done as quickly as possible?
For my patient care.
And is timing something important when it comes to someone who's in cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And why is that?
His heart isn't beating, and it should be, and the longer it isn't beating, the greater the likelihood this individual will not be resuscitated.
Okay. So, did you ultimately load the patient onto the ambulance?
Yes.
And did you end up, did one of the officers on scene come with you?
We had one officer from Minneapolis, yes.
And why was that?
I needed somebody to start chest compressions.
And when you arrived on scene, did you observe anyone rendering any medical care or chest compressions when you arrived?
When I arrived on scene, there was no medical services being provided to the patient.
Okay. So when you got on the ambulance, did you do some further assessment of Mr. Floyd's condition?
Yes.
And was it at that point that, well, what did you do next?
We're in the back of the rig.
Yes.
I had them shut the doors. I took the Minneapolis police officer with me. I started to declothe the individual to better assess.
And just to stop you right there, why do you have to do something like that?
To better assess what's going on, to get room to just do my job and provide patient care.
And when you declothe an individual, does that provide further access in terms of any IV or other options for you?
Yes.
So what did you observe at that point as you were doing your initial assessment of Mr. Floyd?
He had some superficial injuries to his face and shoulder, it appeared. I reconfirmed that he was pulseless and wasn't breathing. I had to take the handcuffs off. I had the clothes getting removed so I could prepare to take care of this individual.
And did you personally take off the handcuffs?
Yes, I took off the handcuffs.
How are you able to do that as a paramedic?
I have a pair of handcuff keys.
So in the line of your work, you're able to use those keys to take handcuffs off an individual?
Yes.
And is that the key that you use?
Yes.
And did you provide some additional direction to the law enforcement officer who was with you?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that?
I inquired to the events prior to my arrival, and I also directed him to do chest compressions.
And was that when those chest compression, upon your direction, was that when chest compressions first began, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, chest compressions began when I initiated them with Minneapolis PD.
Okay. And when you say initiated them, was that a direction that you gave to the officer to
Yes.
start compressions?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to put on the screen an exhibit that has been admitted as Exhibit 57. All right. So just walking back through what you just testified about, can you just describe what's shown here?
That is the patient on our stretcher. That is the back of our ambulance. That is me in a paramedic uniform. I am checking for a carotid pulse.
And was this subsequent to, after your initial check on the street?
I was reconfirming my initial assessment.
And
And
again-
yes, he still did not have a pulse.
Okay. And then let's move to Exhibit 58, please. And what are you doing in Exhibit 58?
Checking for a pulse, repositioning.
And when you say repositioning, just tell the jury why you might reposition somebody.
I was just hoping to find a pulse and reposition for an airway. Just reconfirming that I needed to start working a cardiac arrest.
And had anything changed in terms of your initial assessment?
No miss.
So you were not able to detect a pulse? is that
Correct.
right? And did he appear to be breathing?
No miss.
All right, we'll move to Exhibit 59. Now you indicated that you had given some direction to an officer to start chest compressions. Can you just describe what's shown here?
It appears to be the officer starting chest compressions.
And let's move to Exhibit 60, please. And in terms of injuries noted, what injuries did you observe on Mr. Floyd?
Relatively superficial injuries that I don't believe at the time would resolve in a cardiac arrest.
And I think you made 2 arrows, one to the nose area and one to the left shoulder area. In terms of your treatment of the patient, were these, you said superficial, were these not your primary concern?
No, the cardiac arrest was my primary concern.
Okay. And then we'll put on Exhibit 61, which has already been admitted on the screen. And again, just with respect to the injuries, is this image consistent with what you were describing?
Yes.
Okay.
Facial.
All right. And you're pointing to, you made an arrow on the nose area. What did you observe there?
Yeah, I didn't suspect a life-threatening injury, and I was going to go work a cardiac arrest.
Okay. But does that arrow indicate a finding of some kind? Was there blood or something else you saw there?
It appeared to be blood of a superficial injury.
Okay. But that injury not life-threatening is what you're talking about?
Not, in my opinion.
You were dealing with the cardiac arrest?
Correct.
Okay. All right. We can take that down, please. So ultimately, did you and your partner move with the patient to another location?
Once the individual was loaded, I had directed my partner to move us somewhere more secure and stable and to update fire.
And when you say update fire, what does that mean?
To our new location, and that we're working a full arrest.
So I understand, when you inform fire that you're working a full arrest, what is the message that you're trying to get across? Is there a need that you have?
I requested them code 3 as soon as I got on scene, and I was just reconfirming with my partner that I want them code 3 and that where we're going to be going, please get there to help. I'm in the back essentially working a cardiac arrest alone.
So what was your concern working a cardiac arrest alone and needing fire to come code 3? I mean, what is...
There's a lot to be done in a little bit of time. I'm only human.
And does a cardiac arrest require a lot of hands-on?
Yes.
Okay. And while you're relocating and your partner is driving and you're in the back, are you continuing to assess the patient and continuing to work on the patient?
Yes.
So what, during that period of time, did you observe about his condition? Maybe more specific, anything you noted about a rhythm or lack of rhythm when it came to...
Once we got the pads on, I noticed he was in a systole, meaning he is not producing electrical activity in the heart, and it's not perfusing any blood flow.
So when you say once you got the pads
It's a
on...
flat line.
You said flat line, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm going to try to finish the question. And then
Sorry, I'll shut up. Go.
It's okay, no problem.
Okay.
No problem. But let me just back up just so that we're clear. I think you said he was in asystole or flat line once you got the pads on. So can you just describe just how that works? You know, once you have pads on a patient, what are you able to see on your monitor?
Since I didn't feel a pulse, I put the pads on because then it shows the electrical rhythm on our Zoll monitor. It also allows us to provide a defibrillation in the event that the rhythm presented as such. But being it was a systole, it's a non-shockable rhythm per our protocols.
Okay. So I'll just follow up on that a little bit. You said the pads are connected to a Zoll monitor. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what's the Zoll monitor?
We can take blood pressures, get pulse ox, CO2 readings. It reads the heart rhythm. Take 12 leads on there.
And is that the way you're able to see what's going on with respect to your patient's heart on your monitor?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah, yes.
And you said that at that point he was in asystole, which is a non-shockable rhythm. Is that right?
That's correct.
So does that mean then that defibrillation or applying a shock would not be something you could do at that point?
Correct. Per my protocols, you don't shock a systole.
Okay, and why is that?
It's just not what you do.
Okay. Is there...
You want to change the rhythms, in my understanding. It's not a rhythm. It needs other interventions to get to a better rhythm.
Okay. So in terms of what it means, right, when you say flatline or asystole, I mean, what does that mean in terms of patient status?
It means they're dead.
Okay. And what were you doing in terms of trying to provide whatever care you could provide, knowing that he was in asystole? What were the next steps you took?
I was working a cardiac arrest.
And maybe you could walk through that. So when you work a cardiac arrest, what do you do?
We initiated the chest compressions. I was trying to get our Lucas together. I got the pads on the gentleman. I was getting airway equipment ready, starting to prep some meds and access points and stuff.
And at some point, after the ambulance was parked at another location, did your partner come back and assist with those things?
Yes.
And ultimately, did you set up the things that you needed to set up for your protocols in terms of IV and airway and those kinds of things?
By the time my partner got in the back,
Right.
I hadn't done everything, no. But I was in the process of attempting to resuscitate this individual.
So while you were en route, you were working on the patient, and were you working continuously also when your partner came back after you were parked?
Yes, we were continuing to work a cardiac arrest.
Okay. And ultimately, did Minneapolis firefighters meet you at the location as you had requested?
Eventually, we met up, yes.
And then what happened at that point?
We had the officer leave. Fire took over breathing. We had all that airway set up, oxygen. And he was on our monitor. We had the Lucas going. I started handing out drugs because we had to mix our epis and our sodium bicarbs and spike some saline bags. And I had just said, hey, get as much as you can.
Okay, Okay, so let me stop you there because you just told us a lot of information. So when you said handing out drugs, I mean, is there a specific, are there particular drugs you give when you're dealing with a cardiac arrest?
Yes.
And do those include epinephrine and sodium bicarbonate?
Yes.
And do you have particular concerns or particular courses of action when somebody may have been pulseless for a relatively extended period of time?
Yes.
And maybe, did you follow those protocols in this case?
Yes.
Okay. So after the firefighters get on the ambulance and the officer leaves, at some point, do you proceed on to Hennepin County Medical Center?
At some point, we headed on to Hennepin County.
And what was the determining factor in that, right? What had to happen before you were able to move to the hospital, in your view?
In my view, we got him to a relatively stable position where I could manage this cardiac arrest. We had the firefighters now, we had airways secured, we had some various drugs on board, we had the Lucas going doing the chest compressions, I had him on my monitor. I was able to just kind of conduct, more or less, this cardiac arrest while providing the treatments en route.
And while you were en route, did that treatment continue? Were you actively working on him the whole time you were with him?
Yes.
And while you were traveling en route to the hospital, did you at some point deliver a shock or administer a shock?
Yes.
Can you just describe why you did that and how that came about?
I was checking and monitoring the patient, and I believe saw a run of pulseless VTAC, and that is a different algorithm per my protocol, which indicates a defibrillation, which I provided.
Okay, so at some point when was it that you detected pulseless electrical activity?
En route to Hennepin Healthcare Medical Center.
And I think you testified that is a shockable rhythm per your protocols?
Yes, pulseless VTAC is a shockable rhythm per my protocols.
Okay. Now you what made you notice the change? Was there, in terms of the rhythm?
We periodically check in.
And when you noticed the change, was Mr. Floyd already on the Lucas device? The Lucas device was working on him, meaning giving compressions.
Lucas device was doing compressions at the time.
Okay. So initially he was in asystole, but then you at some point saw on the monitor that there was the possibility of pulseless electrical activity. Is that right?
Correct. We would pause Lucas, do a pulse check. It looked like a rhythm change of the pulseless VTAC. I elected to defibrillate that.
And was there any effect?
It just delivered a shock, and he remained in his quote-unquote dead state, and we continued on with the cardiac arrest.
And so, just to be clear, I mean, when someone is in the state that you're describing, are you looking for any opportunity to administer a shock or provide additional treatment that you might be able to?
Yes, he's a human being, and I was trying to give him a second chance at life.
But ultimately, were you able to generate a pulse or any positive change from that shock that was administered?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Did anything change after that shock? Did anything get better with Mr. Floyd?
No.
Now ultimately, when you arrived at the hospital, what did you do at that point?
When we got to the hospital, I provided a report to the stabroom staff of the information I had and the treatments rendered.
And what was Mr. Floyd's condition at the time you arrived at the hospital?
He was still deceased. We were working in cardiac arrest.
Grounds? Objections overruled. The answer will stand.
Just a couple more questions, Mr. Smith.
Yes, miss.
At any point in time during your treatment and care of Mr. Floyd, were you ever able to resuscitate him successfully?
No.
Did he ever regain a pulse from the time that you arrived on scene to the time that you brought him to the hospital?
No, miss.
And did anything change in terms of your assessment of his condition and status?
No, I showed up, he was deceased, and I dropped him off at the hospital, and he was still in cardiac arrest.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Nelson.
Just 1 minute here.
You may.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hello, sir.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Just a few questions for you. Not very many at all, actually. This is going to sound a little odd, but is it common to feel for a pulse with using your thumb? Like if I was feeling for a pulse on someone's arm, would you use your thumb or should you use fingers?
Generally fingers.
Is that because you have a pulse in your thumb? You
It's
may-
said to be, yeah.
You testified that when you arrived on scene, you checked for Mr. Floyd's pulse initially when you first came, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at that time, the officer Chauvin was, his knee was still on the back of Mr. Floyd, right?
What's the video show? He was still at the head of the patient, yes. I don't remember the exact location.
Of his knee was.
Correct. There's a lot going on.
I'm showing you what's been admitted as Exhibit 56. You were able to feel where his carotid artery was while Officer Chauvin's knee was in that place.
Yes, sir.
You testified that a police officer got in the back of the ambulance with you and began chest compressions at your direction
Yes, sir.
as you were preparing to engage in resuscitative efforts, right?
What's the... You're reconfirming what she's already gone over, is that correct?
Correct.
Then, yeah.
Right. So, officers in the back doing chest compressions, you're getting set up, correct?
Yes, sir.
You went to the second location so that your partner could get back in the back with you to take over for the officer, right?
Not to take over. We needed everybody we could at that time.
Okay. Why didn't you just have the officer help you continue so you could go straight to the hospital?
That's not what we do.
Is it because he's not an EMT?
Any layperson can do chest compressions. There's no reason Minneapolis couldn't have started chest compressions.
That's not my question. My question is, he's not an EMT, correct?
I don't know the level of certification of the individual that got into the back of my rig.
All right. You wanted a partner who could help you out, correct?
I wanted as many people that were willing to help me at that time to work this cardiac arrest.
All right. And that's why fire came, right?
Correct.
And ultimately, the officer was kind of put out of the rig.
Correct.
I have no further questions.
Now you're on.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.